for the time being. Okay, we are live.
All right, folks, welcome to House Energy and Digital Infrastructure on Wednesday, January 29th. We are back. I'm Representative Kathleen James.
Representative Scott Campbell.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia.
Christopher Howland.
Graham Kleffner, Burlington.
Morris Bellingham.
Our guests.
I'm Nick Sampson, Legislative Intern, Chamber of Commerce.
Gabrielle Molina with Towns Rock and Martin, Government.
I'm Maggie Mari, intern for Representative James.
Peter Sterling, New Energy Law.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Thank you. Back to Director Poor.
And TJ Poor, Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. Who do I work for? Apologies if there is glare from my head for everybody watching. Okay, so picking up where we left off, we're gonna actually it was a good split here because we're gonna switch gears a little bit to Vermont electric rates. And so what you see on the screen here is Vermont rates. So all of the revenues collected by utilities divided by all the kilowatt hours, compared with the other New England states and New York here. And Vermont is the dark green line here. And you can see that Vermont's rates are, and for the last couple of years especially, but more stable and lower than other New England states. And one of the big reasons for that is because Vermont has remained what's called vertically integrated in its regulatory structure. So that allows for utilities to be responsible for kind of all three phases of electric service delivery, from generation to transmission to then the distribution and the retail service. In other states, they have what is called retail choice, where the transmission is a component of their bill, but customers can actually choose their service provider for their power supply. And one of the effects of that for other states was that, and one of the rules that went in place in other states is that those service providers could only enter into and secure power for either 6 months or 1 year at a time. And so in that short-term nature, you're kind of subject to short-term fluctuations in market prices. You can see in 2022, prices for the rest of New England shot up. What happened in 2022 is Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And that created it was a global event. Global energy prices went way up. Vermont didn't shoot up like that. And part of the reason is because our utilities, by nature of being vertically integrated, can still have long-term contracts, and most of them do. At any given point, our utilities are between 85 and 95% hedged. And what that means is that they have a contract in advance to cover their supply at the time. Some of those contracts are short-term, a year or two. Some of those contracts are 20-year contracts. Some of them are units that they actually own for the life of the unit. And so, so they own generation as well. And so that kind of mix kind of moderates kind of short-term impacts in price in Vermont. What happens is when those contracts do come off the books, right? Contracts have end dates. Then you need to cover your supply again. And you can do that in advance, but you do it at essentially the prevailing market prices. And so I'll have a slide here that shows that in a minute. But it doesn't stop our rates from increasing due to these global events, but it really moderates the pressure from those short-term impacts.
Representative Putner and Morrow.
So TJ, you and I have talked about how much we like this graph and what a good story it tells. Do you have any sense if outside of New England where the rest of the country would fall, if there was sort of an average US over that time where that line would fall and how volatile it would be?
Well, it depends. There's a lot of other states that do have that retail choice structure. In the 2000s, it was a big effort. It was called deregulation, but they're still regulated. It's just a different type of regulation. So a lot of states went in that direction. I don't know exactly. New England in general is higher rates than a lot of other places in the country, like the Pacific Northwest, and has really giant hydro facilities. And the Tennessee Valley Authority, for instance, in the Southwest is really supported by decades and decades ago, federal support for large hydro. And so their rates are appreciably lower than they are in the Northeast. And there are some other reasons for that too, from population and centers and kind of just even the topography and climate. But Northeast is relatively high as far as the country goes. California, I would say, is really high. Alaska and Hawaii are pretty high, understandably, but New England is kind of in that second tier, I think.
Thank you. So how much of our energy is typically in a given year long-term contract energy? How much on the spot market do we end up buying?
In a given year, so what normally happens is in the long term, like a year or two in advance, that's where we're like 85 to 95% kind of hedged. So we kind of know we've locked in what the price is going to be, right? Then utilities, as you get closer to the time, they'll look ahead, and sometimes it's 6 months ahead, and then they'll look ahead again at 1 month and like really try and cover that load. I think most of the time, by the time it gets to the spot market, we're very close to 100% covered, because they will, even a month ahead, will say, hey, we need another. When I was at VIPSA, this was part of my job. I'd say, okay, we need another 2 megawatts to purchase to cover our expected demand in January, and so we'll go out and buy that a month ahead, so that we're not subject to those spot market prices. Now that's you're locking in that price, and the price, if there's an event, the price is going to be way higher. And by event, I mean maybe a big weather or a cold snap or something. That price is going to be higher, and you've actually secured your energy for less than it would have cost in the spot market. If it's kind of a mild winter, like last winter was, that price is probably going to be lower than what you paid for. But you kind of bought that hedge from that volatility.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. What makes up like those rates? So you saw kind of the whole part of the rates there. Vermont is lower and a little more stable. There's several categories of costs that make up that total rate. And power supply and transmission are often looked at together because they're interrelated, the generation and getting the generation to you. And that is about 3/5 of our electric rate is associated with that power supply and transmission. So purchasing, getting the power generated and getting it to the utility. You can see the different items in here. Energy capacity, that's just really purchasing the rights to power at like the peak time. So it's a more of a volumetric assurance, essentially, that I know that I have enough generation to meet my peak demand. And that's the capacity charges. Renewable energy credits, or another way to say that is meeting our renewable energy standard, is included in there. Regional and local network service, that is the transmission. And so that I'll have another slide on that. That is 17% of the total. So 17% of 100%, not of 61. So if you think about it another way, I could have broken out power supply and transmission here to be 44% power supply and 17% transmission. The other thing that's in here, under ancillary services, that kind of covers, that's like miscellaneous, right? But it covers other ISO New England charges that utilities have to bear. And one example of that is a couple of years ago, ISO New England determined that if the Mystic Generating Station in Connecticut, a really big power plant with a liquefied natural gas terminal at it, if that goes offline or retires, like the owners were threatening to do, and says, we don't want to operate this anymore, then that creates a big reliability issue in New England. Like, we might not have enough power to serve New England in a long cold snap. And so ISO New England says, because they're required to by FERC, we need to make sure that the system is reliable. We said, we're going to do an out of market contract. We're going to pay the owners of Mystic to keep the plant online. And so that contract was hundreds of millions of dollars for the region. Vermont Electric Co-op alone was almost $1 million. And so, think about that in terms of the size of the state. We're talking tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars for Green Mountain Power, and kind of the ratio for each utility in the state. Really big cost that came, and it kind of, those types of things are in there. That happens when you're looking for reliability, and those kinds of conversations happen with the 2 nuclear generators that are in Vermont, in New England also. So I'll put a flag in that for a moment, but those are kind of those costs that New England and Vermonters have to pay for that regional reliability. The center section here is other operations and maintenance. Distribution is one of the biggest pieces in this category. Those are the distribution lines that utilities have to get from the transmission system to your home, right? And then administrative and general expenses, your labor and the customer account management, that type of stuff. And then capital cost, kind of the cost of money and investment, debt, or the return that utilities get. Really should have mentioned earlier, Green Mountain Power is the only investor-owned utility in Vermont, and so they earn a return that goes to shareholders on capital investment. The only way they earn money is when they build infrastructure. So they don't earn money on their power supply contracts, just they pay whatever the price is, say 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and that flows through, and ratepayers pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and they don't earn any money on that. What they earn money on is when they pull some wires in the ground, because they are actually then putting money up front to say, we're going to pay for this $10 million substation, and then ratepayers pay them back over time with a return on that. So that's capital costs, are like that cost of money, and things like income taxes that ratepayers pay, interest, and any debt service.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. All right. But, it just seems like that creates an interesting incentive structure. What is so Green Mountain Power in that case is incentivized to keep building infrastructure. What is optimizing that so that?
Right. So they operate right now under what's called a multi-year rate plan. And so there was a plan approved by the Public Utility Commission that outlines the amount of capital expenses that they could incur over time. And they're over the 4-year period of that plan. And they do have some performance mechanism built in where they can, if they build more efficiently or if they operate more efficiently, they actually can, they share in the savings, right? Ratepayers get some savings and the company gets a little bit higher return. And on the flip side, if their costs are higher, then ratepayers will pick up some of that. You know, it could be storm costs or other valid reasons that costs are higher, but the company picks up a lot of it that ratepayers do not pay. So there are mechanisms there, but there are other cases that come up where they want to increase their capital investment, and there could be good reasons for increasing capital investment, right? They want to, we'll talk about this more in part two, but to harden your infrastructure, whether you want to underground or just adapt to more climate related events, right? And so I think what we do is at the department is, right, ask all the questions of like, why are you doing this? What is the benefit of this? Is this a good investment for your resources? Are these investments likely to be prudent? And so that's kind of the regulatory check on that. So there's a couple of different avenues. And yeah, we're looking to now tie performance and tie benefits that the company earns or money that the company earns to metrics that on reliability and resilience a little more closely. And so that proceeding is going to take place over the next, hopefully the next year and a half to get a better alignment.
Sorry.
Thank you. My question is about capital costs as well, because we heard from GMP and they told us about the distributed battery program, for example. Does that count as infrastructure?
It depends on the particular program, I believe. So there are programs that are, they have a bring your own device program where customers actually bring their device and you get on a tariff and you get paid for the services you're providing. When Green Mountain Power is putting the cost up front, then they are getting a return on that, yes. What we look at in that instance are the benefits that are coming into the system greater than that return, ever greater than the cost that ratepayers are paying for it. And we check their work on that and do that evaluation.
I want to make a bit of a plan because we took an unexpected break. We've got about 20 minutes left, 25 at most. And I see you've got a lot of slides left. Should we plan ahead of time right now that you'll come back and finish this and then, so in other words, come back and finish this and then part two some other time? Or do you think you can, is there a logical breaking point maybe somewhere?
Well, it depends on what you want to see. I could probably skip a couple of these slides or go quickly through them.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of appendix slides that we don't, I prep for information.
Great.
So,
all right. Forward we go then.
Okay. Maybe we'll check in 10 minutes again.
Okay. Great.
Okay, so this chart really quickly are just those wholesale electricity prices that we're talking about. So when the utility is unhedged and what they, when those contracts come off the books, what they will renegotiate contracts will be at the prevailing market prices. And the point of this is, you can see in the gray, the future prices from, this winter forward are expected to be higher than the current prices. And so to the extent a contract rolls off the books, utilities will be renegotiating maybe a long-term, maybe a short-term contract, but these forward prices will be kind of a basis for what they make a deal on. And those are gonna be higher is the point of this slide. Not as high as they were in 2022 when Russia invaded, but higher. And this slide, I forgot I added this one. This actually shows our power supply this is an example, it's Green Mountain Power's portfolio from their IRP, and it shows kind of the stacking of resources that they have out until 2034. And the lines there are the expected load, a couple of scenarios for what the expected demand is. And you can see Green Mountain Power is fairly well, if you have kind of the business as usual dotted dash line, they're pretty well hedged for the next 10 years, right? They have resources to meet their demand. Some of those resources include nuclear and biomass, a little bit, but they are fairly well hedged. And different utilities will have a different picture here, but most of them, not all of them, most of them have resources contracted out like this.
So, oh, sorry, TJ, why don't you explain that drop in 2036?
Sure, two things. There's a big contract with the Seabrook nuclear power plant. So we have nuclear in our portfolio until 2034. No matter, what we do with RECs or renewable energy credits, we will have nuclear in our portfolio. The other one is that Hydro-Quebec contract ends in 2035. And so the combination of those two things create the drop off.
So we need to acquire more resources to meet the demand after that, is that?
Correct.
Which we don't know where they are.
Correct. Okay. And the IRP the integrated resource plan will, list kind of a range of options, right? And what they're looking at and exploring from, solar to offshore wind to other resources to renegotiating with nuclear. That's other costs drivers. Transmission costs are a big one that we are really focused on at the department right now. I talked about those bulk transmission costs and how Vermont pays 4% of the New England transmission costs. You can see that blue bar is big and it is increasing over time, right? Probably, I think it's about 5% a year it's increasing, and that may even be a low forecast. This is Velco's forecast for the next 5 years for transmission costs. And there are some avenues we're advocating regionally for cost containment mechanisms for all of the transmission owners. We think Velco does a really good job in containing costs when they build a pole or a wire. And we don't have as good an insight into other transmission companies in the region. And other states don't have that insight either. So we're working regionally to get that insight and get better understanding, because Velco does it more affordably, cheaper, I'll say, than other utilities, and we need to know why and why we're paying for it. Because we only pay 4%, but 4% of a big number is still a big number. The other components here in this, the green is the kind of Velco costs that are the in-state costs, and you see those are relatively stable over time.
Uh-huh.
Oh, and then, some time, sorry. I'll hold it.
Okay. All right, I'm not gonna I'll go in more detail of the renewable energy standard here, but this slide is just to say every year, and it's included in our annual energy report, we are required by statute to estimate the cost of the renewable energy standard for the next 10 years. This is a picture of what the supply portions of the renewable energy standard costs. So any of the tiers that require retirement of renewable energy credits, that's what you're seeing here. We go through we offer this model up every fall to stakeholders for review, and I can talk about this more next time as we get into more detail, but the takeaway is that as we go forward, its average is 6 to 8% annually of our rates for the renewable energy standard. Okay, why did I just show you a bunch of cost drivers and why things are increasing? This is an illustration of 1 year costs for a cold climate heat pump. To heat your home, the top bar is to heat your home from fuel oil only at $3.50 a gallon. And the next line is if that heat pump, you put in a heat pump and that displaces 30% of your heating needs. In WEX territory, Washington Electric's territory, and then the bottom line's in Green Mountain Power's territory. This does not include the actual cost of the heat pump itself. The point of this slide is not a knock on heat pumps or anything. It is to say that electric rates are critically important to the economic proposition for people to actually switch to electricity. And so you can see that in WEX territory, if you put in a heat pump, one heat pump that's displacing 30% of your fuel oil, then you're actually going to pay more on an annual basis for your energy. And so you can play with those assumptions, right? Maybe it's 40%, maybe it's 20%, maybe fuel oil goes up to $4. When Senator Hedi yesterday, when I shared this slide, really pointed out something important is that there's a lot of volatility in fuel oil prices, right? So the heat pump stabilizes your costs, right? That's a really important attribute. And this chart doesn't talk about societal benefits and costs either of like the avoided emissions, but the point of this chart is just to say, hey, if we want people to switch, we can't say, hey, switch and you're going to end up paying more for your energy supply. We can say that some people will still do it, but to get the penetration we need rates that encourage the switch.
Good. Just so I'm clear, you said that this does not include the actual costs associated with installing a heat pump, including the heat pump itself for repairs to the house.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So if you took out a loan for that, then this would add another few $100s a year, right, as you pay off that loan. And then there's also maintenance of the heat pump as well.
I was just gonna add to that, how you use your heat pump. A lot of people get a heat pump that they mostly use for cooling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's effectively new load in their house. And that we still have a long way to go to optimize between the two, you know. So, I mean, I just know that from talking to constituents. I'm like, wow, you have a heat pump, you never use it in the wintertime. You could be saving a little fuel. But the other question, or the other thing that I think of when I see this slide is that the ability for a Vermonter to electrify costs different amounts of money depending where you live. So we have an equity issue. And it's pretty real, like you see it on that slide.
Also another good point. This slide raises a lot of questions and issues. It does not answer them.
Campbell and Mark.
Also that it doesn't include the cost of the heat pump for maintenance, but it also doesn't include the cost of maintenance or replacement of fossil equipment either, right? So it's just, we're just looking at net fuel costs.
Correct. In this illustration, you would be keeping your current system, your boiler, so you would still have those costs either way. So you're not displacing those costs or changing them in any way, because you still have to have but if you were replacing, you put in a ducted whole home heat pump, then you could get rid of those costs completely. Yeah. Yes.
And sorry, just to add on that very briefly, the fuel and use of your fuel oil furnace that you're displacing extends the life of that equipment. So there's that benefit as well, because you're running 30% less.
I am not sure about that, actually, if it does extend the life. I will take your word for that. I don't know that.
And I pose that more as a question than a statement.
Yeah.
May we query one of our guests who might know?
He's not here to testify, I don't think. So
Okay.
when he comes in, we can,
Thank you.
yeah. Representative Morrow?
Yeah, I'm just curious about this 30% number. Like, it's my impression that when you get a heat pump system, you're much of the year until it gets super cold, for a lot of situations, it's really your primary source of heating. That's my experience with friends and family who have utilized it. So I'm curious why you took 30% as your benchmark.
So there is a range depending on the size of the heat pump that you put in and the type. I mean, this is one single zone heat pump. You could have multi-zone heat pumps, which then cost more and you'd have more displacement. And within that range, you could go from 15% displacement to 50% displacement, or even more, depending on how many heat pumps you put in. So the average, we've used 40% before, but we're in the process of actually doing a study on heat pump usage, and some preliminary results that we're still reviewing actually show, mostly because of the issues that Representative Torrey brought up about behavior and how they're being used, that the usage is actually closer to 25% or less of displacement. And so 30% seemed like a reasonable number in the range. You could, like I said, you could play with those. I think in this case against fuel oil in WEX territory, that I think that would actually, if you displaced more fuel, that would mean more kilowatt hour usage, which would mean more cost. The cost is more than the fuel oil at $3.50 a gallon. The last thing I'll say about this slide is natural gas is also cheaper. 25% of the state is significantly cheaper than fuel oil right now, also volatile, but it's regulated, so that's smoothed a little bit. And so the difference is it's even harder to convince somebody to actually make that change in natural gas territory. So, okay, so we have 7 to 10 minutes left.
We do.
I have a section on demand, like the forecast for heat pumps and electric vehicles, and I have a section on supply, on like what our power supply looks like. I would propose I go skip to the supply section and I cover the demand section when I come back in part 2, but up to.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this will just be 3 or 4 more slides. So this pie chart shows our electric power mix in 2023 based on contracts or ownership of resources. So the word I'd like to use there are the utilities' entitlements to power, right? What they are entitled to have. And you can see by this chart, if you add up all of the non-carbon emitting sources, were about 91% carbon free. And when I say carbon free, I mean carbon at the point of combustion, not life cycle. And that includes nuclear. We have about 18% of our supply was from nuclear. And 45% of our supply from hydro, whether it's Hydro-Quebec or other hydro in-state or on the Connecticut River, which is technically not in-state, but or elsewhere in New England. We have about 10% solar and wind each, 6% biomass. You see New England system mix, that's 8.5%. That's kind of what isn't covered by our contracts, and what nobody has claimed to be theirs in the regional mix. And so that includes a little bit of nuclear, which is carbon free, but it's mostly natural gas. There's a little bit of oil in there. Nobody likes to claim oil. And there's some, there may be a smidge of coal in there in 2023 as well. So it's considered kind of dirtier, right? It's not clean supply. Now, our renewable energy standard, and every state has similar, a renewable portfolio standard or renewable energy standard that requires a certain amount of renewable. And those are based on our renewable energy certificates. And so when a generator generates a megawatt hour, it produces a megawatt hour. For every megawatt hour, you get a renewable energy certificate. And that's true for nuclear or natural gas as well. They also get an attribute assigned to it associated with its emissions. As a whole, like we refer to them in the industry, they're all really renewable energy certificates, even though some of them are nuclear and some of them are even fossil. So RECs are really just a mechanism to demonstrate that someone created the electrons coming from a particular source, from a renewable resource. They prevent 2 different entities from claiming the same resource, right? So, if I have the renewable energy credit from a solar generator, And I have not given it to Representative Morrow as a utility, right? The utility cannot also claim that you've generated that megawatt hour from renewable power, unless I sell that renewable energy credit to you. In Vermont, we use those renewable energy credits to demonstrate compliance with our renewable energy standard. And importantly, you can, as a utility, you can purchase those RECs all at once with the other products of the generator. So you can get the electricity and the capacity, the rights to the electricity at any one given time, and the attribute all bundled together at the same time. Or you can purchase those products separately, and you can purchase just the electricity from one generator and just the renewable energy credits from a different generator. And so just importantly for how RECs work, and then as we look at what does our power supply portfolio look like after renewable energy credits, well, in 2023, we were 90% carbon free after renewable credits. And that's how we track our electric systems after the disposition of renewable energy credits are accounted for. And that is how the greenhouse gas inventory tracks our emissions as well, is based on this chart, not based on the first chart, right? And so you can see how the mix changes, right? We had 10% of solar that utilities had entitlements to. Well, there's only 4% of solar in their mix because they have either held on to those credits, banked them for compliance with the renewable energy standard in a future year, or they've sold them to somebody else because they didn't need them. And so they sell them to either another Vermont utility or out of state, and this chart would reflect that they sell them out of state to a Massachusetts utility or somebody else who also needs renewable energy credits to show compliance with their renewable portfolio standard. We still have 15% nuclear. Our system mix actually goes up a little bit. So after the disposition of RECs, we're 10% that's dirty system mix, whereas we were 9% before. So this other slide just kind of puts those two pictures next to each other for you. It's kind of the same charts, but so you can see really the difference in what our supply portfolio looks like. And as we go forward and go towards 100% renewable energy standard, as is on the books, right? We will see. I showed you that chart where Green Mountain Power had that big chunk of nuclear for 10 years till 2035, 2034, 35, right? They will still have that contract unless they sell it or do something else with it. But they will need to purchase renewable energy credits to meet the renewable energy standard. So it will be, and that's how they will meet it. Those attributes for nuclear that they have, yes, they can sell those. There's markets. Connecticut has a clean energy standard where nuclear is eligible. Massachusetts has a tranche of their standard that nuclear is eligible, but only a portion of the generation is actually eligible. So they won't be able to. There's a transaction cost of selling it first off, but they won't be able to sell off the nuclear attributes, assuming they continue to hold the contract. So just wanted to kind of put that in the back of your minds on kind of how the renewable energy standard works as our portfolio goes to 2034, 2035.
Question, how are the RECs been trending over time in terms of their costs?
It depends. I think I have slides in the part 2 of this, but
we can wait till then. That's fine.
They're right now they're pretty stable for the high. So there's different values and different tiers. That high value REC, which is the new renewable generation built after a recent time certain, those are around $40 a megawatt hour, and they're pretty stable over the last few years, and the futures are pretty stable at that. Some of the existing renewable You know, in 2017, when the renewable energy standard first started, they were really affordable, or really, I'll say really cheap to be more precise. They were like 50 cents a kilowatt or a megawatt hour. There was a couple of years or a year where they spiked to $10 a megawatt hour. And that actually created big costs for some of our utilities who were kind of expecting that low value, and it went way up, and it's a big portion of their requirement. And so even $10 is a smaller amount, but is on a much bigger megawatt hours. And so it became significant. Those have come back down to the $3, $4 range, and but they're a little more volatile, right, I would say, or they have been.
So tier two, you're talking?
That last one, I was talking about tier one.
Tier one,
And, but I will go over the tiers in part two and more specifically, so we have a grounding on what each of those tiers are, what the new law requires, and then we can have that same common understanding. That was my last slide. I will add the demand slides here to the next time I come.
Great.
And I did want to note, I forgot to mention, I did put an org chart of the department in the appendix of these slides. Just so you have it. It has some contact information, both for me, but all the other divisions. We have a consumer affairs division, a telecom division, an engineering division. We do a broad swath of activities. And so and there's other information in the appendix, like where specifically in Vermont some generators are located. Like if you were just looking at what is generated in Vermont compared to our supply, there's a chart in there about that, and some other useful information. But I think I got to the high points.
That's great. Any final questions? And then we'll have Director Korback.
Is that your dog?
It is not. I was looking at like something to be anticipatory. I couldn't find like an image for like a coming attraction, so it is not. But
Great. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll try to get you back in for part two soon, so that we can not lose the thread.
Great.
So,
thank you for having me. Feel free to reach out. My email's there, and my contact phone is on the appendix slides. So, any questions, happy to talk.
Thank you so much. We are adjourned.